Welcome to season 13 of the Parenting Aces podcast, a proud member of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this week my guest is Lisa Pugliese-LaCroix, and Lisa is a certified speech-language pathologist. She is also a certified tennis teaching pro, and she works with athletes that are neurodivergent, meaning either on the autism spectrum or have ADHD, ADD, or some other learning challenge. She is also the founder of Love Serving Autism, which is a nonprofit organization committed to teaching racket sports to junior and adult athletes who learn differently. And I'm super excited for y'all to hear from her and about her work and what we as parents need to understand, both if we have a neurotypical child or we have a neurodivergent child, especially when it comes to being in group settings and competitive settings on the tennis court. So I'm excited for her. Also want to just point out that we have added a disclaimer to our website and our podcast, which you'll hear in a few minutes, because I, after 13 years, realized that I never really told you guys that the people that I have on this podcast as a guest, for the most part, I have no direct personal experience with them. I've not met them in person. I've not worked with them directly, but either they've reached out to me or I've been referred to them through someone else, and that's why they're here. And I'm just here to share knowledge, share products, share services, share anything I can share with you guys to help make your junior tennis journey more pleasurable. So you'll note that is a new addition to the podcast. Now, I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Lisa Pugliese-LaCroix. Parenting Aces is providing this podcast as a public service. Reference to any specific product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Parenting Aces, Lisa Stone, or Fit for Two Inc. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program is not and does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Always do your own due diligence before purchasing, hiring, or using any product, service, or provider. Hey, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I am super excited to dig into your breadth of knowledge today and share it with the Parenting Aces audience.
Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me. I'm excited to be here today.
So I'm going to start with you like I start with most of my guests who are first timers, and just ask if you can give us a little bit of your background specifically in tennis, and then we're going to kind of segue from there.
Great. So I started tennis at the age of 5. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and I don't have an accent anymore, but yes, I was raised in the South and began tournament play, I'd say, by the time I was like 10 or 11 years old. I, really loved tennis. It was something super fun for me. And it was just something that my mom one day had a lesson and said, I can't make the lesson. Can my daughter play? And I was really young. So anyway, I played in the South and ended up being number 1 in the South. And I thought, okay, my dad had a job transfer to South Florida and I was 14 years old. And it's a big move from Memphis to Boca Raton, Florida. Very different world, especially in tennis. And so my dad, we all made the move for his career, and was quickly immersed in the South Florida tennis scene, with junior tennis and the tournaments. And it was a big like wake up for me because everyone in the South is so friendly and nice, and in South Florida especially, it's really competitive, very competitive. But it helped my game, I'd say. So I ended up being number 1 in the, couple years in like the 14, 16s and 18s in Florida, and did my best to, you know, um, focus on kind of like playing tennis, go to school, went to a private school in South Florida. So grades were super important to me too. And then had the decision of, okay, make a decision of what's next. Do you want to go to university, or do you want to try potentially the pro tour for a little while and see what that's all about? But again, private schools, it's all about academics. So I thought, no, definitely I want to go to university and play college tennis. So I started at Duke University in 92, 1992. And I played on the tennis team for 1 year and was a little bit missing my home in Florida. I didn't really know too many people there. It was a great team at the time. But I just decided to request a transfer and did transfer my sophomore year to the University of Florida and played there for 3 years on the team. And it was a great move for me. I'm still friends with both the Duke and the University of Florida teammates. And my senior year at University of Florida, we did win the NCAAs, which was really, really exciting for us as a team. And most of us at that point did go on tour, the seniors, once we graduated. So I started that route, but I did have spinal stenosis in my back. So I ended up getting surgery on my back and kind of taking a break of like, do I want to play on the tour, or do I want to teach tennis, or what am I doing with my life? I was just all over the place. And I didn't love the tour as far as the traveling and the hotels and, qualifyings and playing. It was just very, 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 it's a lot of work, and I didn't know if that was really my bigger purpose in life, but I still enjoy playing and competing. So after surgery, I taught briefly at a few academies in South Florida. And again, just as a hitting partner, but wasn't really in love with what I was doing. So I applied to graduate school, completely changed my life and my career, and became a speech language pathologist, specializing in the field of autism, which it turned out to be great in my life. But at the time, it was just kind of the next step for my career life. So as far as tennis, I started age 5 and really still play a little bit for fun, but not as intensely as I did when I was younger. It was my life other than schoolwork. And now it kind of, and we can talk about what I do now later, but it's really still obviously an important part of my life, the sport of tennis. So
Well, it's part of the name of your organization, Love Serving Autism. So maybe this is a good time for you to
okay.
tell us what Love Serving Autism is, why you decided to start the organization, and what kind of the purpose is and who
Sure.
you serve.
Well, I started Love Serving Autism in 2017. I was working as a speech language therapist at a school for children with autism. And I spoke to the executive director and I said, I'd love to start an after school program because I did miss tennis and I had volunteered for Acing Autism, which is in California. And they have programming, but they didn't really have a lot in our area. So I really wanted to just kind of grow something on my own from a clinical therapeutic perspective of like what we're learning in the classroom. Let's try this in tennis. And I had zero, I'm saying zero nonprofit experience other than I know how to play tennis. I know somewhat how to teach tennis, but I didn't know the nonprofit side. I just wanted to get this going. So it started January 2017, and the mission is to teach specialized. It started as tennis, but now it's racket sports because we're including pickleball. It's really to teach specialized therapeutic instruction to children and adults with intellectual and developmental challenges. And we work on communication, motor coordination, life skills, and behavior. So the court space, whether it's tennis or pickleball, is a therapeutic session for them. And what they're learning through the sports our goal is for it to carry over into their daily life. And that was the perfect like intersection for me of tennis and being a speech and language therapist and putting it all together. And that's how it originated.
And you're also a certified teaching professional, tennis teaching professional. So you say you
Yes.
know a little bit about teaching tennis, but you know quite a bit about teaching tennis as well.
The reason I mention it is because my husband is a USPTA Master Pro, so he's another level of coaching. I would say I enjoy coaching youth and adults who have differing abilities or they're, neurodivergent. I think that's my passion. I did teach briefly at a country club in Boca for a year and taught ladies tennis and this and that, and I'm capable of it, but I think my bigger purpose is to work with this population. So that's why I stayed with it and
Got
kept
it.
doing it. Yes.
Got it. So, what is different about teaching tennis to somebody that learns differently? And I'm going to just give a caveat right now. I am still learning the proper terminology or acceptable terminology around these different learning challenges. So please feel free to correct me. And to my audience, if I say something that isn't appropriate, please know I am still learning and absorbing this language from Lisa as we talk today. So
Sure.
give me a little grace.
Absolutely. I must say, when I started at age 5, we were using yellow ball, right? So it was just regular yellow tennis balls. When I obviously transitioned into coaching, I learned quickly, like there's red ball and there's orange and there's green and there's yellow and they're all like training balls. And I think that the fact that we have access to these red dot balls, especially if someone is diagnosed with autism, even ADHD, ADD, it slows the ball down so that they have a better chance of actually of success. So I think that's something that I learned quite quickly that, wow, tennis has changed a bit, and especially on how we teach juniors and how we teach the developmentally, I don't want the word disabled, pardon me, but those who have challenges. So it's really unique now, where we could use some of these training balls, whether it's red dot or orange, and work on those basic developmental skills. So I think that's helped a lot with an adaptive tennis because it slows the ball down. They have more time to process what's going on, and they have a better chance for hitting it over the net.
Yeah.
So that's one, I'd say, accommodation or modification that we use through equipment. Also, what's different for someone who may be autistic or have ADHD, ADD could be potentially that their attention span, their focus, is not as long as maybe someone who's neurotypical. So we use a lot of visuals. And visuals are picture symbols. We have a banner that hangs in Love Serving Autism. And basically what it shows is a visual schedule and an order of activities and a communication board. And if you're on the spectrum and you need help with following a schedule, you could look up and it's right in front of you. So it's constant redirection to using the visuals, pointing to the visuals, because if you're on the spectrum, you process faster visually than auditorily. So the coaches are trained to use less speech and more gestures and pictures
Interesting.
through the sport. So I'd say that is a big piece of what kind of differentiates what we do versus if you're at a country club and you're teaching someone who doesn't have autism or ADD, ADHD, you're talking a mile a minute, 100 miles an hour, whatever. You're, come on, step in, hit this, hit this, hit this, do this and turn. And someone who is different may not process all that as fast, and it may overwhelm them. So we try to simplify it and break it down and modify our language accordingly so that they can be more successful in the program and in the sport.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, Lisa, not only are you working with athletes, tennis athletes, well, racket sport athletes, but we don't say the P word on here, tennis athletes who learn differently. And so you're modifying the way that you teach them so that they can find success. So that's one piece, but the other piece is teaching the coaches how to modify their coaching methods in order to accommodate somebody who is neurodivergent. Is that the correct term?
Great.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Ooh, okay. So to accommodate someone who's neurodivergent so that that athlete can have success on the court.
Yes.
So I mean, what's so interesting to me, and honestly, this had not occurred to me as something that needed to be addressed on Parenting Aces, is that of course, I know there are children that learn in different ways. But I hadn't ever connected the dots that for neurodivergent players, that there would be maybe a whole different approach to teaching an individual sport like tennis.
Right. Well, the statistics of autism are 1 in 36 children in the US are diagnosed by the age of 8. So that's a huge number. And 1 in 6 children in the US have a developmental delay. And doesn't mean they have autism. They just have some type of motor delay, communication delay. So with the statistics like that, it's all coaches need some type of training in this, especially if you're teaching juniors to learn how to modify their instruction. And that's something that coaches reach out quite often about to me, and say, Lisa, what do I do? I'm teaching, 15 children on 2 courts, and one is just running in circles, and I don't know how to help the one child and still keep the class functioning and going. And that's huge. And also, I am on the USTA National Adaptive Committee. Well, I'm on 2 committees. USTA has a National Adaptive Committee. So I'm the chair of the training and education. So basically, we help write curriculum, and we help advise on curriculum. We help train coaches in the US. And I'm a big part of that training piece because a lot of coaches don't feel confident to step on court and lead someone on court who's neurodivergent, and they want to give them everything they need, but they sometimes don't know how.
Right.
And then I'm also USPTA National has an adaptive task force, so I lead the task force there, and we have about 15 coaches on quarterly calls, and they're also teaching pros who want to give back and help. But we're really working together in the industry to help train others so that they feel they're not lost out on the court when this happens, because it's becoming more and more prevalent. And it used to be, I don't need to learn that as a coach. Maybe I don't need to know that. It doesn't apply to me. And now, you could ask my husband, it applies to every coach at this point, unless you're on the tour, maybe ATP, WTA tour, maybe not so much, but in our communities, definitely. So training I just flew to New York actually, a week ago, the USTA National Tennis Center. I did a training with coaches in the USTA Eastern section who, they work in their community, they work in schools, they're teachers or coaches, and they wanted to know, like, how do I work with this population? What can I do? So it's definitely, I think I'm the busiest right now with training coaches out of anything. Like, that's my role right now, is really doing that.
Which is amazing because, as I've said millions of times on this podcast and elsewhere, coaching education in our country is sadly lagging behind a lot of other countries. And I would venture to guess that, especially when talking about coaching someone who learns differently, we just haven't historically provided that education to our coaches.
No, I mean, really, we haven't. And, it's something that if a coach becomes certified with USPTA or PTR and they're certified, there is really no adaptive curriculum in any of those courses. So I think it's going to change in the next year. I think USTA and a lot of these bigger organizations are starting to recognize what's happening, but it was like, oh, it's optional to learn that. If you want to learn that, you could take a separate course. But I don't think that's what we need to do, obviously. So I think it's starting to change a little bit, and the tournaments are becoming more inclusive, like the US Open, Miami Open. They're inviting adaptive groups to come out and do on-court exhibitions. So I think they're starting to learn about how to do a better job with it. It still has ways to go, I think, but it's at least the process started. So
yeah, that's good news. And by the way, there's no education in USPTA or PTR on the junior developmental pathways in college recruiting either. So just gonna put that out there. It's a bit frustrating. So that really needs to become part of the curriculum as well. But I digress. Let's get back to our topic at hand. So if a coach has a child on court, let's say in a group situation, What are some of the signs that that coach needs to be aware of that this child needs a different type of instruction?
Um, In my opinion, it would be, let's just say a child's in an inclusive setting, meaning it's an after-school program, a junior program, and the coach notices the child is, maybe there's behavior, there's a lack of following instruction, or maybe they become disengaged, something's going on, and they're constantly having to redirect that child to hit, whatever it is, whatever drill they're doing, running forehands, running backhands, whatever it is, that's when it starts to stick out. And the coach is like, all right, let's keep it going, let's keep it moving. And that one child is like stuck, like doing whatever it is. I think that's when coaches like start to become more aware on court of there's someone potentially, with differing abilities or unique abilities, neurodiversity on our court. And a lot of times in those settings, they don't have the proper information. There's sometimes no information given to coaches about this child coming into the class. I think they're really wanting their child to be included and not labeled. So for them, it's like, I'm just going to register them. They're maybe higher functioning, but the coach is like, whoa, what's going on? And that's when I do get the emails of, what do I do? I don't want to assume they have something. I don't want to upset the parents, but I really need help. I need to know what I could do to help this child, or else this isn't going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it
And
gets to that point.
do you recommend that the coach reach out to the parent and have that conversation? And what does that conversation look like?
Oh, that's a great question. I do believe that a coach should have communication with those parents, but I think the conversation needs to start very positively with, I really enjoy having your child in my class, and focus on what they're doing right. And then maybe kind of lead into, but, I'm noticing A, B, and C on court. And do you have any suggestions? Because then the parent could say, oh, well, they get accommodations in school and they have an individual education plan or whatever it is. And then maybe, and the goal is for the parents to hopefully not deny anything, but for the parents to say, try this, because I think, they know their child best. And even if using a visual schedule, like a picture schedule, would help their child on court, and then not to exclude them, but because, there are times when I've heard of coaches saying to a family, we can't serve you anymore. Like, you can't continue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in those situations, that is very discouraging for parents, because they want their child to be included, and the coach maybe just doesn't have the tools, or the director of racquet sports, whoever it is, there's not enough training in that area. So I do recommend that a coach reaches out to the parents, but definitely in a respectful way, not to say, listen, your child's, misbehaving and running in circles. I don't think we can work with your child, because I don't think that's going to work. Then
Yeah.
that way, or does your child have autism? We really don't want to, just assume a diagnosis of anything.
But I mean, the assumption I would guess is that the parents are aware of what's
Right,
going on already
right, right,
and maybe have either consciously or unconsciously chosen not to share that information
correct.
with the director of tennis or the coach.
I think
So
that's
it's
that's
not
what
like the
happened.
coach is telling the parents something that they don't already know.
Right. I wouldn't think so. I mean, I wouldn't think, if there's a behavior on the tennis court, or a attention span challenge, whatever it is, or they're perfectionistic and they miss a ball and they get emotional, it definitely probably shows in other areas of their life.
Mhm.
Like, I can't imagine it's just on the tennis court.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure. And let's talk about the neurotypical kids that are on court with a neurodivergent player
right.
and the challenges from that perspective. Because as you said, everybody needs to gain from the experience. So I would say that for a coach that has a mix of students who learn in different ways,
Mhm.
that's a lot to ask of one coach to manage a group of 8 or 12 kids, all of whom have different needs in terms of how they learn.
Right. And are you bringing, I mean, are you mentioning like more of a clinic setting or more of
Yes.
a tournament? Okay.
Yeah, like a
So
clinical setting
in the
where
clinic
there's
setting,
teaching going on.
okay, where there's teaching instruction going on, I have a story. So we had a student who graduated from Love Serving Autism because he went through red, orange, green, and he was ready for yellow ball. And so I got all excited and I thought, okay, I really want him to join this clinic over in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. And it's an amazing facility and they have great programs and the director is all about inclusion, which she is. And she agreed and he came out, but the coach didn't know he was on the spectrum because you can't visibly see it. Like you can't, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
So he gets out there. He had never really hit a yellow ball. And she's starting to feed. Everyone's in a line and they're doing running forehands, three across the baseline and go back to the line. And he whiffs the first one, whiffs the second one. I mean, airball, like completely whiffs it. And she says out loud, you know, Lisa, and I went to shadow, by the way. I went to kind of, and I didn't have a minute to talk to her before class. So I went there just to kind of support him as needed. And she said, he's definitely not ready for my class right now. Can you take him on a separate court, work with him, and then when he's ready, he can come back? And his face was like in front of all these teenagers. I was like, oh my gosh, he felt like a failure. So he came over to me and again, I worked with him and long story short, a couple weeks into class, she had no idea he was on the spectrum. She was profusely apologetic. She was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know, I didn't realize. And he became her favorite student. And he started to hit the yellow ball and he started to rally. And it was the coolest thing because now his peers in the class knew he was on the spectrum because we had a conversation about it. I think I mentioned it and then I introduced him and I mentioned that, hey, he's on the spectrum, but we are here together to work together. And they were so excited. These children were so excited to meet him and to help him, like whatever he needed. It was like this empathetic nature came over them and they were
Love
all
that.
about like, can I help him? What can I do? And they were cheering him on when he was rallying. And it was more the motor coordination piece that was not easy for him, but he was starting to get it. And so it was really a success story, in my opinion, of taking a child who was in a self-contained, maybe, autism class or sessions, and then putting him in an inclusive setting and then with neurotypical students. And they learned about his diagnosis. They weren't making fun of him. There was no bullying. It was all about, hey, I'm here. I want to learn. I want to meet you. I want to be your friend. And so I think children, especially, are like more drawn to wanting to help with a student who may have differing abilities. Like they may want to say, oh, I know I don't have that, but I want to help him or her to do better. And I think sometimes the tough part for parents, though, is if you sign your child up for a class and it's yellow ball and they're still learning or whatever, and you expect the class to teach your child all the skills they need, right? And once in a while, you'll hear a story of a parent saying, well, I don't want a child with special needs or autism in my child's class because that's going to slow the class down.
Yeah.
That's going to impact the whole group. So once in a while, you get a parent who says that, and they're competitive themselves, and they want their child to compete, and it can happen, especially in South Florida or probably California too. It's like very intense, competition here. But my experience has been very good with that, and I think it does take a little bit of explaining, especially when the children are younger, to know what autism is or anything that might be different. But now, I hear parents saying though that there are a lot of inclusive classrooms in schools now where a child may be maybe higher functioning on the spectrum in their class and they know what autism is. Back when I
Mhm.
was younger, I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
So I think it's different. It's changing.
That's great. That's great to hear. And a lot of times, children can educate their parents, and that's a good role for kids to take on as well and share that empathy, share that knowledge, and share their experiences. Hopefully change the mindset of the parent a little bit.
I agree, Lisa, because I was obviously in a highly competitive tennis environment as far as junior tennis in South Florida and college tennis. And My parents were wonderful, great, non kind of tennis parents. They played tennis, but they weren't like pressuring me. It was very
Mhm.
different, but I was lucky. But at the end of the day, I didn't really get, I was so focused on winning and results that I never had the opportunity to learn anything else. Like I never did community service, or I never got involved outside of tennis. And so that was my identity. And I think parents don't realize that, you can go to an academy and train 8 hours a day in tennis, but if you don't have anything outside of it, or you don't have, anything to give back to, it can actually impair your child's ability to compete because they feel so much pressure. It's all about tennis. This is only who I am. Everyone loves me if I can do well in my schoolwork, and letting your child feel like I'm human, I can volunteer and help other people, and it puts it in perspective a bit more. But here in South Florida, it's just, it's training, 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 and there's not a whole time for anything else. But I wish when I look back, I had those opportunities even in college
Mm.
to volunteer my time, because I didn't even think about it. It was just, we have no time. We're in school and you train, and that was it. So I hope, if I wish parents can learn from that a bit nowadays, if they're listening, at some point to this, like, try to encourage your child to give back and get involved off court, because I think it will help develop them as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the underlying tenets of Parenting Aces is it's all about developing good humans, not just good
Yes.
tennis players. So it's exactly what you're saying, Lisa, that, for sure, these kids are very busy between tennis and schoolwork. And some of them, the schoolwork even takes a back burner to the
Sure.
tennis. But everybody can find an hour a week or even an hour a month to
Right.
do something outside of their comfort zone to give
Right.
back and share the good fortune that they've had with people that don't have access to that. Which kind of is a good segue into this next question, which is, let's say you have a neurodivergent tennis player competing in a junior tournament, playing against a neurotypical junior tennis player.
Right.
What are some things that the neurotypical player needs to be aware of about their opponent? And what are some things that the neurodivergent player needs to be aware of about their opponent?
Well, I have to tell you, I don't have a whole lot of experience as far as Love Serving Autism. I think we've only had maybe 2 participants get to that level, because a lot of our players are impacted a lot by the diagnosis, so they need a lot more support on court. So they're not really independently playing in tournaments at that level. But what I have experienced with the two I'm referring to is, okay, so if you're neurotypical and you're playing someone who is on the spectrum, for instance, I don't know if they're always going to know in advance. It would be nice sometimes if they did know in advance, just so that it would help them understand what could potentially be going on if they see something. But I don't think we're at the point yet in the industry where, and I don't know because I don't run tournaments, but if tournament directors are actually speaking to parents to say, hey, we have a register on the spectrum, your child's going to play him or her in round one. Like, I don't know if that's actually being done.
Mm.
So
So it
the
seems like that's a good first step, maybe.
I think that would be a huge first step,
Yeah.
of doing that. Secondly, the one of the teenagers I'm thinking of did play in a little local tournament, and the father afterwards said, Lisa, he said, my son had a blast playing. He said he got a little turned around with the score, and he needed some help, but his partner helped, his opponent helped him with the scoring. So I guess the
Nice.
opponent knew something was going on. But the parents of the opponent were very upset that their
Mm.
son had to help him at this level with keeping score, because they thought it was going to distract him from playing his game. And I think the parents struggled with it the most. So the father of the child with autism said to me, my son had a great time on court against his opponent, but we weren't too happy with the behavior of the parents, the opponent's parents, watching the match. And I thought, wow, like, that was interesting. I don't know, maybe they didn't understand autism, maybe they just didn't know what was going on. but he didn't have much experience keeping score at that level, and he was just learning. And also he's perfectionistic, so if he missed a shot, it might take him a minute to redirect his emotions and go on to the next point, because that can happen with someone on the spectrum.
It can
And
happen with someone not on the spectrum.
I know that. I just thought about that. Yeah, that is a very good point. But I think if you're neurotypical, you're just going to play your. I mean, I don't think you feel sorry for them or like, oh, they're a victim. They have something. Like
Right.
you have to play and win. But I'm sure children, a part of me is torn with that, because if they did know in advance, they must feel guilty. Like, I beat someone with autism, or I beat someone with like a disability. But on the other side of it, the child with autism's in the tournament because they want to be treated like everyone else, and they want to be in an inclusive setting. But I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I think that's a whole nother topic of training directors of tournaments, even junior directors of tournaments, like all that, to understand the statistics nowadays, how to communicate with parents if they're entering their child who's not typical or atypical, like what that experience would look like, what it should look like, how can we support this child. I don't think it's happening um, as much as it probably could be.
Yeah. Well, listen, we are parenting aces. We are here to educate parents. So I'm really happy that you brought up the fact that the neurotypical player was very sweet and
Very sweet.
helpful, and that the education needs to happen on the part of the parent more than the part of the child. So
Yes.
parents, if you're watching or listening to this is something now to be aware of. And I think these statistics are, pretty eye-opening. The numbers of kids that are out there playing sports, trying to integrate into, you know, normal, for lack of a better term, competitions, tournaments, and the likelihood is your neurotypical child is going to run across an opponent who is not neurotypical at
It can
some point.
happen. It can even happen whether it's junior tennis, college tennis. I mean, I do think there are pro players, potentially a few on the spectrum, but it doesn't impair their ability to play necessarily. But I think that juniors are like, we just had a big international tournament in Palm Beach Gardens, and I'm curious, like, of all those hundreds of kids coming through, how many have ADHD, ADD, OCD, autism? Like, I don't even know how they would capture that in the registration, as far as
Mhm.
knowing like if any accommodations are required or necessary. They probably don't mention it, but they just get through the tournament how they do, the best they can. But I wanted to tell you, in the USTA, they have a national adaptive tournament, a unified adaptive tournament every year, and it's actually a national championship. So uh, in a young adult, or could be mostly young adult, I'd say, yellow ball player with autism or any kind of neurodivergent qualities can compete and have a unified partner. So you or I can play with, one of the players in doubles, and they have qualifiers throughout the US. So they have these national adaptive championship qualifiers. And if you qualify, say in Florida with your partner, you get to go to the national championships every year at USTA National Campus in Lake Nona, Florida, and compete against other unified doubles teams. And that's been very interesting, because these are high performance players who, in adaptive world, who are yellow ball, can serve and return, keep score. But the biggest challenge isn't so much with the athletes or the players, it's with their partners and or the teaching pros who are playing with them, on what's appropriate on court, and not hitting a winner 100 miles an hour at a young adult with autism who maybe can't, you know, hit that, respond well and react quickly enough. And we've actually had to do some training with some of the unified partners on how to interact appropriately and play appropriately on court. I'm not saying you have to play down all the time, but make sure you're really hitting. The whole goal is to engage the atypical players on court, and make sure that they get a chance to hit a volley, winner, or a drop shot winner, whatever it is. And it's not time to like cream everyone on the court, and I think that So it's not only it's everywhere. I mean, there's just a lack of understanding at times of what's accepted, what's appropriate, what should we do, how should we handle it. We really want to win as a team, but maybe it's not right for me to hit an overhead smash at
Yeah.
the player across the net with autism. It's not. So it's still a work in progress, but it's a beautiful tournament every year and it's growing. And so I just wanted you to know that that does exist. It's very inclusive. They have a whole weekend dedicated to this tournament every year.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was at the Nadal Academy last week, there was a wheelchair tournament happening on the campus, and they had one day with a very similar type of, I guess, tournament day as to what you're describing, where one of the junior players that was a full-time junior at the academy, so a neurotypical player, was partnered with a wheelchair athlete and they played doubles together. And it was so cool to watch. And these kids learned so much from their partners because the wheelchair athletes were all adult players. They weren't juniors. So you had an adult with this life experience and this court experience sharing their knowledge with
The
this
junior,
rising junior player who was
wow.
training at a very high level. So very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as adaptive tennis, I mean, you'll see wheelchairs is almost a separate category
Yes.
because it's obviously physical versus cognitive for the most part. But there's so many, there's blind and visually impaired tennis, there's standing adaptive, there's intellectual and developmental disabilities, they're calling it. So there's different, there's basically it's three buckets of, I guess, adaptive tennis. There's cognitive, there's physical and social emotional. So even Wounded Warriors, they have
Mhm.
programs for veterans of PTSD, and it's just amazing like what tennis does for so many people. But as far as like the parenting piece, I think, and I can't imagine it's easy as a parent. I don't have a child myself. I'm sure it's not easy watching your child compete in a tournament and then you have a child with autism on the other side, even if it's an orange dot tournament, whatever it is, orange ball tournament, whatever it is, you want your child to win. And it's not so much about slowing down to like, oh, bigger picture is this would be a great lesson for them. I mean, I think that's probably not easy for parents. You want to give them every opportunity they can to succeed. But if you think about it, I think teaching your child how to succeed off court is just as important as on court. And not
Yes.
everyone turns pro and carries on for their life. Some get burnt out, from all the intense training. So it's definitely a huge topic. And my husband Kyle, if he was on here, he could tell you what he's seen at this club in Boca, where this the junior parents coming through and just demanding things, and it's time to move my child up and this and that. And I get it, like it makes sense, but it's not always what's best for the child. So
Right. Well, and what I want the takeaway to be from this episode today is that there are children that are atypical who still are very successful tennis players and are competing at the tournament level, whether they're autistic, whether they have ADHD, ADD, or some other cognitive issue.
sure.
They are out there, and they're out
Yes.
there in bigger and bigger numbers. And so to awaken our sensitivity to that, and not only for the junior player to be sensitive, but for the parents on both sides of the net to understand that this is what's happening on court. Let's be sensitive to each other's needs here. We're all in this together to grow the sport, to put these, great kids out into the world to be contributing members of society as adults. And this is one step in the process. And what happens on court in this match, in this moment, isn't determinant of the rest of their lives, but can be a stepping stone towards something really wonderful.
Absolutely. I mean, I did not know, honestly, when I was younger, tennis was, I did not know I'd be doing what I'm doing today, helping children and adults with autism and neurodivergent, I had no idea that I would be doing what I'm doing ever, but I just know that I had a heart for it. And I felt like when you're in tennis and you're focused on winning and results, you're not so much thinking about how to help others, which makes sense. But it's such a freeing feeling when you go onto a red ball court and you have a group of children with autism and they're so happy and they're so excited to be out there. And as a coach, or as a parent, you could go out and say, wow, like they love this sport. And I think when you raise as a parent now, say you have a neurotypical child, you never know if your child may end up in this field somehow
Yeah.
or helping others through the sport, because it is very it's I'm happiest doing this than I have to say, winning matches. Like I feel like this is bigger to me than that. But at the time I didn't understand that.
Of course not. Of course not.
Yeah.
I mean, and you wouldn't expect a young child or a teenager even,
No.
or even a college age
Right.
student to understand that necessarily. But this is all part of growing up and maturing and being exposed to new things and learning that, especially in an individual sport like tennis, that the world doesn't revolve around you as the athlete, that there's a bigger world out there. And, we need to expand our knowledge of that world as we move through it. Lisa, before we wind up here, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to let our audience know how they can get involved with your organization, what they can do to help. Do you have local chapters, for people around around the country, around the world?
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, so I'm located in South Florida myself. I'm the founder of Love Serving Autism. I can be reached by email anytime by coaches, parents. But we do have a website, loveservingautism.org, and there is a programs page. We're in about 15 states right now. There's a huge need for therapeutic recreational tennis and programming in general for this population. So we probably will continue to expand. We don't have any international programs yet. We do have requests for international programs, but it's just obviously training the right coaches to lead those classes, since it's international is something we're working on. As far as volunteering, if you go to our website and you see there's a local program, you want your child to volunteer, there's a page on our website where you can click on volunteer information, and then you will log in and sign your child up so they can register as a volunteer. And then from that point, they send like a quick little screening link, especially if you're an adult, they have to do the background check. So your
Good.
child can register as a volunteer, and then they get community service hours. So say you find a location, oh, there's a program in Delray Beach, Florida. Great, we live here. My child can volunteer on Saturdays, and the child could bring their community service hour form. The coach can sign it, so they're getting hours. We do have a gala coming up in October in Boca Raton, Florida, that some of our out-of-state, coaches come to, and parents. And so it's like an annual fundraising campaign that celebrates our mission. So it's in October. And did I mention everything?
And we'll have links to all of that in the show notes. So for those of you watching or listening, you'll be able to click on all of that in the show notes.
Great. And I guess I would just want to end to say, thank you, Lisa, for this opportunity. And parents do an incredible job as far as, when I visit programs, especially when you're raising children with autism, for example, it's a lot of work. But if, just keep in mind as a parent of a neurotypical child that, all the parents are doing the best they can. We're all doing the best we can. And to be inclusive in your mindset and try to understand that not everyone's the same, and try to recognize that, there are opportunities to help someone else, and that really goes a long way. So I think that's something I wanted to share today.
I love that. And just as an adjunct to that, listen to your children and learn from them, watch them, let them be a good example to you, because if you're like me, I grew up a long time ago where I didn't have exposure to kids who learn differently. They were pulled out of the mainstream and put in specialized classrooms and specialized programs and things like that. There wasn't that integration. So these are all things that I've learned watching my children be more exposed and experience, a more inclusive type of learning. And so we all can learn something new every day. And Lisa, I think, what you're doing is so important. And I'm really happy that we're able to connect and share your story here.
Thank you, Lisa.
To my audience, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you next time on Parenting Aces.